Hello students, this is Mr. Morgan, and this lesson is going to be about unit conversion. We're going to answer the question, how do you convert the values of variables into different and equivalent units? And I mean equivalent because you can't convert days into pounds, but you can convert hours into seconds, and that's what I mean by different and equivalent. So let's look at the steps. So here's some background. From here on out in science, you're going to get answers that have recorded values, and you're going to get units that you start off with, and you might have to report your results in different units. This happens in physics, it happens in chemistry, and it happens in biology. So this is a useful skill, and we're going to take you through the steps on how to do it. But first, we'll talk about why we do it and why it works. And the first piece is that if you don't put units on a value, it could be anything. So if you write 32, you have to put 32 what? It can't just be a number hanging out there by itself. You have to relate it to the physical world because science is about describing the physical world. So let's say you put 32 days. Well, what if the person wants their answer in hours or something like that? You have to convert units. So there's some math that helps us do this, and math is kind of a funny, tricky thing. So the first thing is that whenever you multiply something by 1, it gets to keep its value. So some examples of this are 3 times 1 is 3, 5 times 1 is 5. But it also works with letters. So h times 1 is h, and the word apple times 1 is still apple. So we can multiply all kinds of things, anything you can conceive of, and if you multiply it by 1, it keeps its value. And then we can take that a step further, which is the idea that whenever you write something that equals 1, you've essentially written 1, and if you multiply the thing that you wrote that equals 1 times another thing, it also keeps its value. So some things that equal 1, 5 over 5 equals 1, 2 plus 1 over 3 equals 1, and if we take it to its conclusion, we have what's called an equivalency or a conversion factor, where we take two units and an amount of those that equal each other, and we've written 1. 1 year and 12 months are equal to each other, so if you divide them, you get 1, and 12 months is the equivalent of 1 year. You could reverse that fraction and still get 1, and that's a way that we can convert years and months from one way to the other just by reversing the fraction either way. In essence, when we use these equivalencies or conversion factors, we can change the value and the units, but we don't change what those values represent or the total amount. It's reversible, and we could always go back to our original measurements and they'll be equivalent. So let's do a little bit of application. We're going to look at the question, how many days are in 5 years? And if you see this, you might be itching to grab your calculator or your phone and sort of type in 365 and 5. And you'll get a value that's probably pretty close. But we violated a couple of rules of math and science that if you continue to hammer out multiplication this way, it's going to lead to worse and worse values and bad units and all kinds of things. So I'm going to show you the actual critical steps that are going to lead you to success further down the road. And I promise, if you get good at this, you will appreciate it, even though it seems super tedious at the time. So the steps kind of go a little something like this. We're going to write down our starting units with what we're going to start with on the left and the units we want to end up with on the right. And that looks like this. We're starting with years and we're ending with days. And oftentimes there isn't an immediate step of equivalency that connects those. So you might have to do some intermediate steps. We kind of know that 1 year equals 365 days, so that's good. But if there's not just one single equivalency we can come with, we might be able to think of one or more units that are in the middle that allow us to connect those equivalencies, something you're less familiar with than time. But since we're doing time, let's think of some intermediates. What are some ones you can think of? How about a year equals 12 months? Or the idea that 1 month is approximately 4 weeks, and 1 week is 7 days. So we've got little baby steps between years, months, weeks, and days, which again, it might be a little bit too close to home. You understand those units pretty well, but if it was something else, it might be nice to have those steps. So here we go. What do we do next? So our last step is simply to set up the problem. We're going to write our starting value and our units, and then we're going to multiply it by our ones or our equivalencies until we arrive at our final unit, which will be days. If you're careful about your selection of ones or equivalencies, each time you multiply, you should be able to cancel out the previous equivalency. So we'll start with years. If we want to cancel out years, we got to make sure in our next equivalency that years is on the bottom, and now we've converted to months. Now we got to make sure that months is on the bottom, and we've converted to weeks. Weeks is on the bottom, and finally we've arrived at days. And so if we multiply these all together, we should end up with a big old equation that looks like this. And after we multiply and cancel, we end up with our answer. So let me just take you through, if I can, what the cancellation looks like, because I think it's always good to kind of go through. So I'm going to grab some red ink and we'll look at those cancellations. So in our final product, which is this right here, we can see that years divided by years equals 1. So that's a cancellation. Months divided by months equals 1. That's a cancellation. And weeks divided by weeks equals 1. So the only unit we're left with is days. 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. And anything divided by itself or divided by 1 is itself. So we just multiply the numbers across the top. And we have this. Let's look at our essential question. How do we convert the value of a variable into different but equivalent units? So hopefully your answer will have something to do with steps, the concept of ones, and conversion factors or equivalencies. And I'll leave you with a little problem to tackle. How many hours is 6 million seconds? Okay. I'll see you in class, and if you have any questions, make sure you catch me at the beginning, and try out the practice problems, the graphic organizer, and the summary questions at the end.